The air chills the second the words leave his mouth. Not a physical cold, but a bone-deep, soul-freezing kind. It starts in my ears, a buzzing that overrides the urgent shouts around me, the squeak of expensive leather chairs being shoved back, the thud that echoes like a gunshot. Then it spreads, a paralysis seizing my limbs. I can't move, not an inch, as his body hits the polished mahogany floor. He's there, crumpled. A moment ago, he was upright, smug, a smirk playing on his lips, ready to watch me break. Now, just a heap of tailored suit and shattered arrogance. The Mistress, a slick, dark-haired creature perched beside him, lets out a strangled scream that's half terror, half pure, unadulterated rage aimed, bizarrely, at me. Hands reach for him. Someone is shouting his name. Another is fumbling for a phone, presumably 911. The chairman of the board, a man whose face has been carved by decades of corporate warfare, stares, his usual impassivity replaced by a mask of shock. The other board members are a tableau of frozen disbelief. And I just stand there, a statue carved from ice and something that feels like shattered glass. My chest is tight, impossibly tight, like a vice squeezing the air from my lungs. This wasn't the plan. Not exactly. The victory, yes. The reclaiming. But not this. Not the sudden, sickening fragility of a man I once. Let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. And if you haven't already, please subscribe. It helps me more than you know. Life before felt like standing on solid ground. Rock solid. Every morning, I woke up to the familiar weight of purpose. The sunrise filtering through the tall windows of our bedroom, highlighting the dust motes dancing in the light. The scent of coffee brewing downstairs. The rhythm of routine. Get up, get dressed, tie pulled tight, skirt perfectly pressed. Downstairs, the brief, perfunctory kiss hello or goodbye, depending on his travel schedule. Breakfast was usually consumed in silence, punctuated only by the rustle of newspapers or the soft clinking of porcelain. Our lives were separate tracks, running parallel, rarely intersecting except for the occasional dinner, a mandatory social event, the shared address on our mail. But there was a foundation there, I thought. A history. 20 years. That's a long time to build something, anything. A home, a life, a partnership. He had his career, finance, the world of abstract numbers and high-stakes deals. I had mine, tangible, breathing, a company I built from nothing. It started with a single idea, a spark. A gap in the market, a need nobody else saw. I poured everything into it. My savings, my time, my energy, my very identity. Long nights fueled by lukewarm coffee and sheer stubbornness. Days spent pounding the pavement, pitching, failing, getting back up. The first few years were lean, terrifying. Doubt was a constant companion, whispering insidious fears in my ear. But I pushed through. I hired the first employee, then another, then 10, then 50. We grew. We innovated. We disrupted. The company wasn't just a business. It was a living entity to me. Its hallways were the arteries, its meeting rooms the heart, its employees the lifeblood. I knew their names, their stories, their kids' birthdays. We were a team, a family of sorts, bound by a shared vision. The logo on the wall wasn't just a design. It was a symbol of everything I had sacrificed, everything we had achieved together. The patents, the products, the market share, they were tangible proof of a dream made real. My office on the top floor wasn't opulent, but it felt like the command center of my world. The view stretched out over the city, a concrete landscape I felt a part of, a builder within. The buzz of activity from the floors below was a constant, reassuring hum. This was my creation. My legacy. My husband, Mark, was initially supportive. Or at least he seemed to be. He'd listen patiently, offer generic encouragement, sometimes even use his financial contacts to open a door or two. He was proud, he said, of my drive, my success. We were the power couple, the envy of our social circle. He handled the money, the investments, the bigger financial picture of our lives. It made sense. He was the finance expert. I trusted him implicitly with that side of things. My focus was the company, its growth, its future. Our roles were defined, complementary. Or so I believed. Evenings were quiet. Sometimes we'd have dinner together, polite conversation about the day's events, careful not to delve too deep, not to disturb the placid surface. Sometimes he was out late, meetings, clients, travel. I was often working late myself, the hum of the office a more comforting presence than the silence of the large house. We were busy people, successful people. It was easy to mistake parallel existence for shared life. It was easy to overlook the widening gyre between us, the spaces where connection used to be, now filled with professional obligations and unspoken distance. The solid ground I stood on felt firm, but I never thought to check for sinkholes beneath the surface. And the biggest one was opening right under my feet, dug by the hands I trusted most. The world I built, brick by painstaking brick, was about to be swallowed whole. The email arrived on a Tuesday morning. Gray, unremarkable, buried in a flood of automated reports and internal memos. The subject line was something innocuous, a standard legal notification about a change in corporate structure. My finger hovered over the delete button. It looked like spam, boilerplate legalese. But something stopped me. A flicker of unease, a tiny prickle on the back of my neck. I opened it. The language was dense, opaque, designed to confuse anyone without a law degree. But the core message cut through the jargon like a knife. A transfer of ownership. A change in directorship. My name was listed as having relinquished all control. And another name was listed as the new majority shareholder. A name I didn't recognize. Sarah Jenkins. My breath caught. Sarah Jenkins. The name echoed in the hollow space opening in my chest. Mark had mentioned a new associate in his firm. Young, ambitious, sharp. He'd used those words with a certain emphasis. I hadn't paid much attention. Just another name in the blur of his professional life. My eyes scanned the document again, frantic now. This couldn't be right. My company. The one I built. How could ownership be transferred without my knowledge, my consent?
Then I saw it. A signature.
A scrawled, familiar signature at the bottom of the authorization page. Mark's signature. My hands started to shake, so violently I had to grip the edge of my desk. The office around me, moments ago familiar and comforting, seemed to tilt. The city outside the window blurred into an indistinct smear. No, this was a mistake.
A terrible, impossible mistake.
He wouldn't. He couldn't. Not Mark. Not my husband. I picked up the phone, my fingers fumbling with the buttons. I needed to call him. To demand an explanation. To clear up this insane misunderstanding. My assistant buzzed through. Mr. Harrison on line 1, demanding to speak with you. He says it's urgent. Harrison was the head of my legal department, a shrewd, cautious man who rarely ruffled feathers. His voice on the phone was tight, strained. Eleanor. Thank God I got through. Have you seen the email? Harrison. What is happening? This document, it says Mark he signed over? My voice cracked. It's worse than it looks, Eleanor. Far worse. I'm looking at the executed documents. He didn't just sign over his share or a portion. He used a clause hidden deep in the initial corporate charter, one he insisted on years ago, remember? Said it was standard for married founders, protected spouses in case of, well, anything. It gave him certain executive powers as a co-signer on certain financial and structural decisions, especially regarding significant debt or major equity changes. He twisted it. He used it to execute a hostile transfer. He argued legally that since he's the primary holder of the marital assets used to originally fund the company's initial significant expansion debt he structured and managed, and due to some convoluted power of attorney granted years ago for financial matters, he had the right to transfer ownership to satisfy a financial obligation. A financial obligation? The phrase hung in the air, cold and meaningless. To whom? Who is Sarah Jenkins? Harrison was silent for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was softer, hesitant. Eleanor, the papers list her as the creditor. But my sources. Mark has been seeing her. For a while, it seems. Sarah Jenkins. She's a lawyer. Works for a firm known for hostile takeovers. And not just corporate ones. The world didn't just tilt this time. It shattered into a million jagged pieces. Not just the company. Not just the betrayal of trust. The double betrayal. The affair. The calculated, cold-blooded use of our shared life. His position as my husband. To steal the very thing that defined me. The thing I loved as much as I thought I loved him. Sarah Jenkins. The name wasn't just that of a stranger anymore. It was the name of the woman who had taken my husband and was now taking my life's work. And they had planned it. Together. Using the quiet trust of a marriage as their weapon. The solid ground was gone. I was free-falling into an abyss I didn't know existed. The air I breathed felt like ash. The woman on the phone, scrambling for answers, was not the confident CEO I had been moments before. She was someone else entirely. Someone hollowed out, exposed, bleeding from wounds she hadn't known she had. The first few days were a blur of raw pain and disbelief. It felt like being submerged in icy water, unable to breathe, unable to think clearly. The company was gone. Just gone. The email accounts were locked. My access badges deactivated. Security guards, unfamiliar faces, stood by the entrance, their expressions neutral, impassive, like gatekeepers to a kingdom from which I had been permanently exiled. I tried calling Mark. Repeatedly. He didn't answer. His voicemail was full. I tried his office. His assistant, her voice clipped and cold, said he was in meetings and unavailable. The mistress, Sarah Jenkins, didn't answer either. It was a wall of silence, designed to shut me out, to leave me flailing in the dark. My home felt alien. Every object, every shared photograph, every piece of furniture seemed to mock me, reminders of a life built on a foundation of lies. Mark eventually came home, days later. Not to explain, not to apologize, but to pack. His face was a mask I'd never seen before, hard, cold, devoid of emotion. When I finally cornered him, demanding to know how he could do this, how he could steal my company, our life, his answer was chillingly simple. It was a business decision, Eleanor, he said, his voice flat. You were letting sentiment get in the way of profitability. Sarah has a clearer vision, a bolder strategy. A business decision? I echoed, the words barely a whisper. You sold my life's work to your mistress? You used our marriage to strip me bare? He shrugged, a dismissive gesture that felt like a physical blow. She's not my mistress. We're partners now. In everything, he looked at me then, really looked at me, but there was nothing in his eyes. No remorse, no guilt, just a cold, calculated indifference. Frankly, Eleanor, you became complacent. This was necessary. For the company's future. And mine. He packed 2 suitcases. He didn't look back. The front door closed with a soft click that echoed like a gunshot in the sudden, vast silence of the house. He was gone. With my company. With her. I felt adrift. The solid ground was not only gone. The sea I was floating in was choppy, cold, and full of unseen predators. I contacted lawyers. Expensive ones. Their offices were plush, the lawyers themselves sympathetic, but their words offered little comfort. It's complicated, Eleanor. The paperwork is robust. He was very thorough. That clause in the charter, it's highly unusual, but legally binding. But he defrauded me. He used his position as my husband. Proving intent is difficult, they'd say, their voices full of professional commiseration that felt hollow. Especially when the transfer is framed as settling a debt. And they've set it up that way. A significant loan from a holding company registered in Sarah Jenkins's name to cover operational costs and necessary restructuring, secured against the company's equity. The terms were impossible to meet in the timeframe given, triggering the transfer clause. It looks, on paper, like a legitimate, if aggressive business maneuver. A legitimate business maneuver. My life reduced to a footnote in a hostile takeover disguised as a debt settlement. The legal battle felt like trying to fight a phantom. Every avenue I explored seemed to lead to a dead end. They had covered their tracks meticulously. Mark, the finance expert, and Sarah, the corporate shark lawyer. A perfect, toxic pairing. My former employees started contacting me, cautiously at first. Whispers of discontent from inside the company. Sarah was ruthless, firing long-term staff, dismantling the company culture I had carefully cultivated, prioritizing short-term gains over long-term vision. The company was bleeding talent, bleeding its soul. My employees, the people I cared about, were suffering. This wasn't just about my loss anymore. It was about the destruction of something bigger than myself. The betrayal ran deeper than I could have imagined. Financial accounts I thought were joint were cleverly structured. Assets I believed were secure were leveraged or moved. The house, the symbols of our shared life, were tied up in a legal knot designed to make my divorce as financially devastating as possible. They weren't just taking the company. They were trying to erase me entirely, reduce me to nothing. Sleep became a luxury I couldn't afford. My mind raced constantly, replaying conversations, searching for clues I might have missed, signs of the insidious plot unfolding beneath the surface of our ordinary lives. Every memory of Mark was now tainted, viewed through the lens of this ultimate betrayal. Was it all a lie? Our entire marriage? Was he just waiting for the right opportunity? The weight of it was crushing. It felt like being buried alive under the rubble of my own collapsed life. The future I had envisioned, the legacy I was building, was gone, replaced by a gaping void of uncertainty and fear. I was financially vulnerable, emotionally shattered, and professionally annihilated. They had won. It felt like they had won everything. And I had nothing left but the bitter taste of ashes and the gnawing emptiness where my heart used to be. Every morning was a struggle just to put one foot in front of the other. The world outside my door felt too bright, too loud, too indifferent to the silent scream trapped inside me. Rock bottom didn't arrive with a crash. It was a slow, suffocating descent. Each legal setback, each story of Sarah's ruthless dismantling of my company, each silent, empty room in the house he'd abandoned, chipped away at my resolve. There were days I couldn't get out of bed. Days when the sheer weight of the injustice, the scale of the betrayal, felt too heavy to bear. I was a ghost in my own life, haunted by the vibrant past, paralyzed by the desolate present. Then came a call. It was David Chun. He was on the board. Quiet, observant, rarely spoke unless he had something significant to say. He had been one of my earliest investors, a staunch supporter. But the board structure was complex. Mark had maneuvering room, especially with the financial and legal members he'd cultivated over the years. I assumed David, like the others, had been blindsided or perhaps pressured into accepting the transfer. Eleanor, his voice was low, urgent, on a burner phone he'd obviously acquired for secrecy.
We need to talk.
Not over the phone.
Can you meet me?
Somewhere discreet. My first instinct was suspicion. Was this a trap? Another layer to their cruelty? But the desperation in his voice, the risk he was clearly taking, overrode the fear. I agreed. We met in a small, anonymous coffee shop miles from the city center. He looked tired, lines etched around his eyes. He didn't waste time on pleasantries. It's a mess, Eleanor, he said, stirring his coffee, not looking at me. Sarah Jenkins. She's aggressive isn't the word. She's a wrecking ball. She's alienating key clients, driving away talent, making decisions that are fundamentally damaging the company's long-term prospects for short-term gains. The projections she presented to the board are optimistic, to put it mildly, based on slashing costs that are essential for innovation and quality. He finally looked up, his gaze direct. The board is getting nervous. Very nervous. We were told this transfer was necessary, a brilliant financial maneuver orchestrated by Mark to stabilize the company. He painted a picture of you being resistant to necessary changes. Out of touch. He leveraged his position, his supposed expertise, his marital status to push it through before anyone could scrutinize it properly. He used proxies, rushed the process. Said it was time-sensitive, a deal that couldn't wait. He lied. I stated, the words flat. He did, David confirmed, his voice grim. About everything. About the company's financial state, about your competence, about Sarah's intentions. He presented her as a white knight, a financial genius. Turns out, she's just a predator, stripping the company for parts. We're looking at irreversible damage if this continues. But the transfer, my lawyer said it was legally sound. On paper, yes. Mark and Sarah are good at creating a convincing paper trail. But they made mistakes, Eleanor. Big ones. In their arrogance, they overlooked a few things. Things that matter to the board, beyond the immediate legal technicalities of ownership. He leaned closer, lowering his voice further. The bylaws. Section 7, Clause B. It pertains to changes in leadership resulting from demonstrable malfeasance or actions contrary to the company's core mission and values. Mark framed this as a simple ownership transfer, settling a debt. But the effect of their actions, the destruction of value, the alienation of key stakeholders, the potential for long-term ruin, triggers a review clause. And there's a fiduciary duty, Eleanor. To the company, to the employees, to the original mission. A sliver of light. Tiny, almost invisible, but it was there. A crack in the impenetrable wall they had built. And, David continued, pulling a small, encrypted USB drive from his pocket, they also underestimated how many people at the company are still loyal to you. People who saw what was happening who were appalled. They've been quietly gathering information. Evidence. Proof of Sarah's destructive decisions, documentation of Mark's misrepresentations to the board, even communications between them planning how to sideline you and take control. They call themselves the Resistance. He slid the USB across the table. It felt cool, heavy, and possibly significant. This is everything. Financial records they tried to hide, emails, internal memos outlining their plan to gut departments, proof of conflicts of interest Mark failed to disclose. It's messy. It's damning. It's the truth they buried under their lies. My hand closed around the USB drive. It wasn't just data. It felt like a lifeline. A chance. A possibility I hadn't dared to imagine. The crushing weight on my chest lifted, just slightly, replaced by a fierce, cold determination. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. They thought they had won. They thought I was broken, defeated, erased. They were wrong. The despair of the past weeks solidified, not into defeat, but into a hard, sharp weapon. This was the midpoint shift, from victim to strategist. From despair to cold, calculating resolve. The tears dried. The trembling stopped. The ice around my heart didn't melt. It hardened into something like armor. They had played dirty. They had used the most intimate bond, marriage, as a tool for theft. Now it was my turn. And I would use every ounce of pain, every shred of betrayal, every dark corner of their deception against them. The fight wasn't over. It was just beginning. And this time, I wasn't fighting to survive. I was fighting to dismantle them, piece by piece, and reclaim what was mine. The game had changed, and I intended to win. The light David Chin offered was tiny, but it illuminated a path. A difficult, treacherous path, but a path nonetheless. The initial rush of hope quickly gave way to the daunting reality of what lay ahead. Mark and Sarah were powerful, well-connected, and ruthless. They had legal firepower and Mark's intimate knowledge of the company's structure and secrets. This wasn't going to be a simple legal challenge. It was going to be a war fought on multiple fronts: legal, financial, and psychological. The evidence on the USB drive was indeed damning, but presenting it required strategy, precision, and impeccable timing. We couldn't just dump it all at once. We had to build a case, layer by layer, proving not just that the transfer happened, but that it was based on fraud, misrepresentation, and actions detrimental to the company's health. It required dissecting Mark's convoluted legal maneuvers, exposing Sarah's predatory business practices, and demonstrating that their financial obligation narrative was a smokescreen for a hostile takeover driven by personal ambition and greed. I assembled a new legal team. Not the sympathetic, cautious lawyers who saw too many obstacles, but sharp, aggressive litigators who specialized in corporate warfare. They were expensive, but the evidence, combined with David Chen's insights and the network of loyalists inside the company, the resistance, gave them leverage. The first challenge was the sheer scale of the deception. Mark hadn't just transferred ownership, he'd systematically drained certain accounts, leveraged assets to the hilt under Sarah's direction, and set up shell companies to obscure the money trail. Unraveling it was like pulling a single thread from a tightly woven tapestry, painstaking work that threatened to unravel everything. Every revealed detail was another gut punch, a fresh wave of nausea. To see the meticulous planning that went into destroying me, orchestrated by the man I had slept beside for 2 decades, was a unique kind of torment. Meanwhile, Sarah was tightening her grip on the company. Layoffs intensified. Departments were merged or eliminated with brutal efficiency. The company's culture, which had been its heart, was being systematically dismantled. The innovations we had been working on were shelved in favor of maximizing immediate profit, even if it meant sacrificing future growth. My former employees were demoralized, scared, some leaving voluntarily, others being forced out. Hearing their stories was a constant reminder of what was at stake. This wasn't just about getting my company back. It was about saving it from slow, deliberate destruction. Mark and Sarah were not idle. They knew I was fighting back, even if they didn't know the extent of the evidence I possessed or the allies I had cultivated. They launched a counteroffensive. Publicly, they maintained their narrative. I was a disgruntled ex-wife, unable to accept necessary changes, trying to sabotage the company out of spite. They fed stories to the press, painting me as incompetent, emotional, unfit to lead. It was character assassination, swift and brutal. Friends, acquaintances, even some former colleagues distanced themselves. The whispers were insidious, damaging my reputation in the industry I had helped build. They also tried to pressure David Chen and other board members they suspected were wavering. Legal threats, veiled warnings about their own investments, exploiting past mistakes or indiscretions. The internal conflict within the board intensified. Some members, swayed by Mark's financial projections and Sarah's aggressive tactics, believed this was necessary, albeit painful, restructuring. Others, like David, saw the writing on the wall. The company was being bled dry. The legal battles dragged on. Motions and countermotions. Court dates pushed back. The cost mounted, financially and emotionally. There were moments, even with the evidence in hand, when the wall of their defenses seemed insurmountable. Their lawyers were good, exploiting every technicality, every loophole. They argued the board had approved the transfer, that I had implicitly agreed to Mark's financial authority years ago, that the current business decisions, while unpopular, were within the bounds of their executive power. The pressure was immense. I was juggling legal strategy, coordinating with the resistance inside the company to gather ongoing evidence, dealing with the personal wreckage of my marriage, and fighting a public relations war. Sleep deprivation became chronic. Stress was a physical weight, pressing down on my chest, making every breath shallow. I saw Mark and Sarah occasionally in court filings, their names side by side, a constant, searing reminder of the intertwined betrayals. They seemed confident, almost gleeful, in their public appearances, reinforcing the image of a united front cleaning up a mess I had supposedly created. They made a tactical error, though. In their haste to consolidate power and silence dissent within the company, Sarah overstepped. She unilaterally changed the terms of a major contract with one of our longest-standing, most valuable clients. A client I had personally cultivated for years. This client, a powerful corporation themselves, objected vehemently. The dispute escalated rapidly, threatening not just that single contract, but potential future partnerships across the industry. This wasn't just bad business, it was reckless, arrogant, and directly contradicted the company's stated mission of fostering long-term client relationships. This incident galvanized the wavering board members. It was concrete proof that Sarah's leadership was actively harming the company's core business. David Chen used this incident to push for an emergency board meeting. The purpose? to review the current leadership's performance and the circumstances surrounding the transfer of ownership, citing Section 7, Clause B of the bylaws, the malfeasance clause. The date was set. The stakes were absolute. This was my chance. My one, possibly only, chance to stand before the people who held the company's fate in their hands and present the truth they had been so carefully shielded from. Failure meant the permanent loss of everything, vindication for Mark and Sarah, and the probable ruin of the company I had built. Success meant reclaiming my life, exposing their deceit, and potentially saving my employees and my legacy. The deepening crisis had led to this single, terrifying point. All the legal battles, the gathering of evidence, the silent suffering, it all converged on this one meeting. I wasn't just fighting for myself anymore. I was fighting for the soul of the company. And I knew, with chilling certainty, that I had to walk into that room not as the wronged wife, but as the unwavering founder, armed with truth and an unshakable resolve to take back what was mine. The armor was on. The battle was imminent. The air in the boardroom was thick with tension. It hummed a low, almost audible frequency. I walked in, not with the hesitant steps of a trespasser, but with the deliberate stride of someone reclaiming their territory. My legal team flanked me, their faces grim but resolute. Across the polished expanse of the table sat Mark and Sarah. They were a picture of calculated confidence, a smug little tableau of power. Mark offered a flicker of a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Sarah watched me, her expression a cool, predatory mask. The board members were already seated, their faces a mixture of curiosity, discomfort, and stony neutrality. This was it, the final act. The chairman, Mr. Davies, cleared his throat. His gaze swept across the room, lingering for a moment on me, then on Mark and Sarah. We are convened for an emergency session of the board, as requested, to review the circumstances surrounding the recent transfer of majority ownership and assess the current leadership's adherence to the company's bylaws and mission. He gestured to me. Ms. Harrison, you requested this review. The floor is yours. I stood, my hands resting lightly on the edge of the table. My voice, when I spoke, was steady, clear, betraying none of the turmoil churning inside me. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members of the board. For over 20 years, this company has been my life. I built it from the ground up, with a clear vision, innovation, integrity, and a commitment to our employees and clients. I looked directly at Mark and Sarah. Their expressions remained unchanged, confident, almost bored. In the past few months, I continued, my voice gaining a quiet intensity. That vision has been systematically attacked. I was forcibly removed from leadership through a series of calculated deceptions, orchestrated by Mark Harrison, my husband at the time, and Sarah Jenkins, his partner. I let the word hang in the air. They executed what appears, on paper, to be a legitimate transfer of ownership to satisfy a fabricated debt. But it was not legitimate. It was a hostile takeover, disguised as a financial transaction, based on a foundation of lies told to this board and executed using loopholes built into the company's structure under false pretenses years ago. I signaled to my lead lawyer. We have prepared a presentation. It details the full extent of the deception, supported by irrefutable evidence. Slide by slide, we laid it out. First, the convoluted financial maneuvers Mark had used, presented as legitimate debt management, but designed to create a crisis only a transfer could solve. We showed the dates, the amounts, the shell companies Sarah had set up. We proved the loan never truly benefited the company, but was instead siphoned off into accounts controlled by them. Next, we presented the evidence from the resistance. Internal emails between Mark and Sarah, explicitly detailing their plan to remove me, discussing how to manipulate the board, gloating about their impending control. We showed how they had misrepresented the company's financial health to justify the drastic measures they were taking. Then came the proof of Sarah's destructive leadership. Cold, hard data. Decreased productivity figures directly linked to mass layoffs. Client satisfaction scores plummeting after her contract changes. Evidence of shelving profitable, innovative projects. We showed the projected long-term damage to the company's market position, contradicting the optimistic figures they had presented to the board previously. We finished with a legal argument, dissecting Mark's use of the charter clause and the power of attorney. We argued that his actions, while technically possible within a narrow interpretation, were fundamentally fraudulent, taken without my consent, and constituted a clear breach of his fiduciary duty not just to me, but to the company itself. We invoked Section 7, Clause B. His actions were demonstrable malfeasance, directly contrary to the company's core mission and values. As the presentation unfolded, the atmosphere in the room shifted. The board members, initially skeptical or impassive, leaned forward. Their expressions changed from neutrality to concern, then to shock, and finally, for many, to quiet anger. They were seeing the truth, raw and undeniable. Mark and Sarah's smug confidence began to waver. The color drained from Mark's face. Sarah's cool mask cracked. A flicker of panic crossed her eyes. They exchanged frantic glances, whispering furiously to their own lawyers. When the presentation ended, silence descended, heavy and charged. Mr. Davies looked around the table. Mr. Harrison, Ms. Jenkins, do you have a response to this evidence? Mark's lawyer stood, his voice tight. Mr. Chairman, this is a collection of cherry-picked accusations based on stolen documents and misleading interpretations. Mr. Harrison acted within his legal rights as per the company charter and his authority. The financial decisions were sound, necessary for the company's survival. Ms. Jenkins's leadership has been decisive and forward-thinking, addressing areas of inefficiency overlooked by previous management. He spoke boilerplate defenses, but the conviction wasn't there. The board had seen the emails, the financial transfers, the data showing plummeting performance. The paper trail of deceit was undeniable. Mr. Davies nodded slowly. He didn't invite further argument. The board has reviewed the evidence presented by Ms. Harrison and her counsel, as well as the response. We have also considered the provisions of Section 7, Clause B of the company bylaws. He paused, letting the weight of the moment settle. My heart pounded in my chest, a frantic drum against my ribs. This was it. A vote is called, Mr. Davies announced. On the motion to find that the transfer of ownership executed by Mark Harrison on date was the result of actions contrary to the company's core mission and values, constituting malfeasance as defined in Section 7, Clause B, and is therefore null and void. And on the subsequent motion to reinstate Eleanor Harrison as the majority shareholder and chief executive officer, effective immediately. He went down the line. Mr. Chen? Aye. David's voice was firm. Ms. Patel?
Aye.
Mr. Rodriguez?
Aye.
One by one, the votes were cast. Each aye was a hammer blow, chipping away at Mark and Sarah's crumbling facade. Their faces were a study in disbelief, their eyes wide with dawning horror. They hadn't anticipated this. They thought they had covered every angle, secured their victory. They hadn't counted on the evidence, the bylaws, or the board's ultimate responsibility to the company over personal loyalties or manipulated finances. They hadn't counted on me finding the crack in their armor and striking with everything I had. The votes continued.
Aye. Aye. Aye.
There were no abstentions.
No dissenting voices.
The evidence was too overwhelming. The betrayal too clear. The damage too obvious. Finally, Mr. Davies reached the end of the table. He looked at the tally sheet. His voice, usually dry and formal, held a note of solemn finality. The vote is unanimous, he stated clearly. 10 aye votes. 0 nay votes. The motions pass. The transfer of ownership executed by Mark Harrison is null and void. Eleanor Harrison is reinstated as the majority shareholder and chief executive officer of this company, effective immediately. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was filled with the echoes of those 10 votes. It was the sound of a kingdom reclaimed, a deception unraveled, a betrayal exposed on the grandest stage. And that's when it happened. Mark, who had been frozen in his seat, his eyes wide and staring, made a strangled sound. He clutched his chest. His face twisted in sudden pain. He gasped, a ragged, desperate sound. And then he collapsed, slumped forward, hitting the polished mahogany table before sliding to the floor. The smug confidence, the cold indifference, the carefully constructed mask, it all shattered in an instant, leaving behind only a crumpled heap of human vulnerability. Sarah screamed, a sound of pure shock and terror. The room erupted. People were shouting, rushing forward. My lawyers moved to shield me, but I barely registered them. I was staring at Mark, lying on the floor. He had stolen my company, shattered my life, tried to erase me. And in the moment his carefully constructed world imploded, he collapsed. Not a calculated move, not another lie, but a raw, physical breaking. The victory was mine. Unanimous. Absolute. But watching the man I had once loved, the man who had orchestrated my ruin, lie broken at my feet, it wasn't the pure, unadulterated triumph I might have expected. It was messy. It was shocking. It was the climax to a drama I never wanted to be a part of, ending not with a bang, but with a sickening thud. The chaos after Mark's collapse was surreal. The sharp, sterile air of the boardroom filled with shouts, the frantic sounds of paramedics being called, the rustle of expensive clothing as people knelt beside him. Sarah was shrieking his name, pushing people aside, her carefully composed mask completely shattered, revealing a raw, panicked woman underneath. My legal team tried to guide me away, suggesting I leave, but I stood frozen, watching the scene unfold. This was the man who had systematically dismantled my life, and now, in the moment of his ultimate defeat, his body had failed him. It was a twisted, dark kind of symmetry. The paramedics arrived, their movements efficient, professional. They worked over him, hooking up monitors, administering oxygen. The room was a strange tableau of high-stakes corporate power and fragile human mortality. The board members, moments ago the arbiters of my fate, now stood back, their faces pale, humbled by the sudden intrusion of life and death into their carefully controlled world. Sarah, sobbing now, clung to his side, her earlier aggression replaced by desperate fear. It was a jarring transformation. The woman who had been so cold, so ruthless in her pursuit of power, was reduced to a frightened partner watching the foundation of her ill-gotten gains crumble before her eyes, literally and figuratively. I didn't feel pity. Not exactly. The pain he had inflicted, the damage he had done, ran too deep for simple pity. But there was no triumphant glee either. Just a profound, unsettling emptiness. This wasn't the clean, satisfying ending of fiction. It was messy, complicated, and tinged with a deep sadness for the loss of the life I thought I had, for the man I thought I knew. The betrayal had been so absolute, so clinical, that seeing this raw, physical breakdown felt almost incongruous, like watching a machine suddenly weep. Eventually, the paramedics stabilized him enough to move him. They carried him out on a stretcher, Sarah following, her face a blotchy mess of tears and mascara. The room was silent again, the air heavy with the residue of the drama. The chairman, Mr. Davies, looked at me, his expression unreadable. "Eleanor," he said, his voice quiet. "Congratulations. And my apologies. We were misled." The other board members murmured agreements, some offering awkward apologies, others simply nodding, their eyes avoiding mine. They had been manipulated, yes, but they had also been too trusting, too willing to accept Mark's narrative, too slow to see the truth. But they had corrected it. Unanimously. That counted for something. My first steps as CEO again were taken in that tense, silent room. I didn't feel a surge of power or elation. Just a weary sense of responsibility. The company was bleeding. It needed immediate care. It needed its heart and soul restored. Mr. Chairman, members of the board, my voice was still steady, but softer now. Thank you for your vote. There is a great deal of work to be done. The company has suffered significant damage in the past months. My priority is to assess the situation, stop the bleeding, and begin the process of rebuilding trust with our employees, our clients, and the market. I looked at my legal team. We will also be pursuing all necessary legal avenues to recoup the funds that were misappropriated and address the damage caused by Mr. Harrison and Ms. Jenkins. Leaving the boardroom that day felt different from walking in. The weight on my shoulders wasn't just the burden of betrayal anymore. It was the heavy mantle of leadership, of responsibility for the hundreds of people who depended on this company. The victory was mine, yes, but it came at a devastating cost. My marriage was over, shattered beyond repair, exposed as a cruel deception. My trust in the man I had built a life with was annihilated. The company I loved was wounded, needing intensive care. Driving home, the city lights were just a blur. The house was still empty, silent, a monument to a life that no longer existed. The emotional closure wasn't neat or clean. It was a tangled mess of relief, exhaustion, lingering anger, and a profound sadness for the path my life had taken. I had been put through a fire, stripped bare, betrayed by the person I trusted most. But I hadn't broken. I had found a hidden strength, allies in the dark, and a way to fight back against overwhelming odds. Reclaiming the company wasn't just about the business. It was about reclaiming my identity, my purpose, my belief in myself. They tried to erase me, to reduce me to a footnote in their scheme. But I fought back, armed with truth and the sheer will to survive and reclaim what was mine. The unanimous vote wasn't just a legal victory. It was a resounding declaration that deceit and betrayal, no matter how cleverly disguised, could be defeated. Mark's collapse was a shocking, physical manifestation of their psychological and strategic defeat. They thought I was weak. They thought they had won. They were wrong. And sometimes, the universe has a way of delivering consequences that are far more dramatic and blindsiding than any human could orchestrate. The road ahead is long. Rebuilding takes time, effort, and resilience. The scars are deep, a permanent reminder of the cost of blind trust and the depths of human deceit. But I stand here now, not as the victim, but as the survivor, the rebuilder. I reclaimed my company, yes. But more importantly, I reclaimed myself. And that victory, complex and bittersweet as it is, feels like the most important one of all. The silence in the house is still vast, but it's not empty anymore. It's filled with the quiet hum of a new beginning, a life forged in the fires of betrayal, stronger and clearer for having survived the flames. If this story hit close to home, if you've ever felt betrayed, or lost something that defined you and had to fight tooth and nail to get it back, I'd love to hear your version. Drop a comment with where you're listening from and what time it is. Thanks for being here. Subscribing helps bring more of these to life.